Hey, I'm Alan Firstenberg,
Hey, I'm Roger Kibbe,
and welcome back to Two Voice Devs.
Two Voice Devs.
Roger, fantastic to have you back, and thank you for suffering with some of the technical glitches that we've been having so far today.
Well, it's great to be back. And, as I say, sometimes the gremlins are out in force. So you and I had some gremlins getting this recording started, but I think it's going to work great from going forward. So,
Knock on particle board, I think we got this one. Today, one of the things that we've had, you and I have talked about a lot in the past are kind of the role of, you can call them small language models, you can call them edge large language models. They've got a bunch of different names, but I feel like the conversations you and I always have around them are, these are models that are getting deployed outside of the big data centers
mhm.
that are running on your machine. Maybe they're running on a mobile device. Some of them you can do tuning on, some of them you can't. But it's this notion of this LLM is now where the users are. And we've seen a lot of really interesting work around this in the past several weeks that I think you and I wanted to touch base and talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what you're seeing a lot of not only people kind of were talking about the conceptual idea of doing this, but now Microsoft, Apple, and Google all decided to embed LLMs in their operating systems. I believe Google's the only one who's done it today. Oh, maybe the Microsoft, the new AI PCs that are just went on sale
Mm,
have it. But eventually, Android, iOS, Mac OS, Windows, etc., everything is going to have a small embedded LLM in there supported by the operating system vendors. And so it kind of opens up beyond the kind of theoretical what we could do. Now there's an LLM sitting there to kind of be able to be taken advantage of, so to speak.
well, I think, I mean, it raises a huge pile of questions. I've got a ton of them, and I don't think we have all the answers yet. But I guess let's start by let's talk about why this is good, why this is good for consumers, why this is good for the vendors, why one of the things I always like to look for is where are things a multifaceted win. It's not just win-win, but it's win-win-win. Where are those places where everybody wins with this kind of thing?
No, the low hanging fruit is why is it good for the vendors? Um, Working for a very large Android phone manufacturer, the largest, and things. And I've been through the voice assistant era. And why did we put ASR and NLU locally on the phones? Okay, yes, it's privacy and latency and things like that, but really it was cut cloud computing costs. And the
Yeah.
cost of ASR and NLU is a small fraction of LLM inference. And so I think the win for the big vendors is the fact is now it's all run on the local processor, and so you're cutting those cloud computing costs. And quite frankly, I mean, why do you need to go to the cloud if something is a really simple thing to do for things like summarizing text is not a very intensive thing for an LLM to do, and so you can do that locally. So I think for the big kahunas, the value is very obvious. It's cost savings, and then they can go and say it's more private, which it is, and
Hmm.
latency should be improved, et cetera, et cetera. But I'm pretty sure that the driver is the cost, which is totally understandable. And you have all
Yeah.
this excess. I mean, I don't know how much of my CPU I use on my computer general, unless I'm doing video editing, probably a small fraction and whatever the GPU capabilities it has. And I think we use a tiny fraction. Our mobile phones are getting crazy powerful. And I bet you most of the times it's sitting there idle, like having lots of
What
excess compute power.
I mean, part of me agrees with that, but I'm also like, I know a lot of people that are still using budget phones, and they're still using relatively budget computers, and those devices are barely making it as is. I can't see them running any AI capability right now, not even close. And then when you say, well, okay, fine, it just means that the next generation or the generation after that, eventually we are going to be boosting. that processing, that capacity. But then I feel like, okay, but we're also boosting that cost. Are we now making operating systems that are no longer capable of running on low end hardware?
We are. I mean, we're
Okay.
making look at Android and iOS. So they're
Yeah.
bifurcating. So I believe on iOS when it comes out, it's coming. It's and for iPhone 15 and above, and I don't know what iPad or Mac OS, but probably an M1 or better Mac, actually an M1 or better. And then on the Windows side, right, it has to be the AI PCs, right, which are
Mm-hmm.
those new Snapdragon ones there. And I know Android, it's only on the Pixel 8 and the latest Samsung phones. So yeah, we're kind of bifurcating the capabilities of the OS and saying, if you have the latest and greatest, you can do all these things. Otherwise, you can't. Now,
It's
whether
not.
it's
It's not even on the Pixel 8. It's on the Pixel 8 Pro.
oh, okay.
I don't even think the Pixel 8 can handle it for some reason.
But if I'm one of those companies, I want you to upgrade. So this could be, this could be
Right.
the carrot, right?
Well, okay. How much of a carrot is it for consumers? What?
Now that's the big question. That's the 800-pound question because how good, what is local? And I think that's kind of, to me, is the more meaty discussion is kind of like, well, what does this unlock for the consumer that
Yeah.
would be so good that you're like, oh, I'm going to go upgrade my phone, or I'm going to go buy a new Mac, or I'm going to go buy a new Windows machine. Um, and I think that's still being discovered. I mean, frankly, when you see, and we've seen it with Google announced it, Apple announced it. We just had a Samsung event last week where we highlighted it, and Google came on stage and talked about it. There, Microsoft did a dog and pony show and announced that the AI PCs, but they're all like, what are they doing? Simple text things,
Uh
right?
huh.
So summarization, helping you write little simple image generation things. And I don't know which of these things are running local. Well, I have an idea that things like summarization, because I know that's easy to do with an LLM, is probably running locally. But all of them are using this hybrid approach of local and in the cloud. But I'm not. I honestly like the promise is really interesting, but right now, would I go and upgrade my phone because of the AI capabilities? Probably not. No, I've grabbed my phone because I want a better camera, or that. Although that's even slowed down too because they're so amazing now, right? Like
Right.
it used to be every
I mean,
couple of years you're like, I gotta upgrade, and now I'm like,
and,
I don't know.
and it's worth remembering that the biggest reason, the big technology behind the cameras is AI. I mean,
True.
all of the real work in the cameras these days is done by very specially tuned models that's doing the magic back there.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. A lot of what do they call them? Computational photography experts are
Yeah.
doing really. I mean, Google was really I think the ones who innovated so hard because when the Pixel first came out, and I remember that night mode, and I was like, "Whoa!" That just blew me away that it could do that. And I think, and then everybody sees, oh my gosh, we got to get on this, right? And has done similar things, but that was pretty. That was okay. I would argue. Now, I don't take a lot of nighttime photography, but if I did, or that was important, that would be something where I might be like, yep, I'm going to upgrade my phone just for that
Yeah.
capability. So that was a really good example of I call it a killer enough feature that could drive an upgrade.
So I guess going back to LLMs, what is the local killer feature for LLMs?
Good question. Good question. I don't know if I have an answer. Here's what I'm excited. Can I get a little? I'm excited about not so much what the vendors are going to do, because right now at least they're kind of doing a lot of Me Too stuff, right? And everybody's copying each other. And yes, you do summarization. Yes, you make it easy to write emails. You do simple image generation. You do AI image editors, right? Everybody's kind of doing the same stuff. What's interesting is now that there's an LLM embedded in the operating system, and you can as an app developer, at least in most of these OSs. I'm not familiar with all of them and what the capabilities are exposed are. Um, but let's take Android because I am pretty familiar. So they have this thing called AI Core that
Hmm.
exposes the LLM to the OS, which means as an Android app developer, now I can have an LLM there. And so now it's kind of a little bit, and I get it. Instead of, yes, I could go to the cloud and pay cloud inference costs and things like that. But now if I have a local LLM, it's essentially free to use. And so now I think it's up to the creativity of the app developers to go and go, oh, well, what can I do with this? Right? What can I do? All of a sudden, I can understand language pretty well. Maybe a chatbots everybody knows about, but maybe there's other apps that like understanding natural language locally could benefit from it, or some kind of text manipulation or image manipulation. I keep on think I always think games first because games are they're always the ones who typically press the boundaries,
Yes.
right? And so I don't know. I'm not a big gamer, and I certainly am not a game designer, but I have to believe that there's some game designers that are looking at this and going, that's pretty
See,
interesting.
and I'm thinking of things like, and I agree with you about games, but I'm thinking about things that are really, really text heavy.
Mm,
Things where I mean, kind of the one that I'm like are the chat systems, and these are chats to other people,
mhm,
or the email systems where it's text heavy, and I might want a sidebar or a bottom bar that is giving me better text completions than what a keyboard, what
mhm,
the Gboard is giving me right now.
mhm.
Or, having that assistant sitting along the side, I've got my app and I'm going to have an assistant sitting alongside that app watching everything that I'm saying in the app and kind of giving me suggestions as I go
Right,
along. You
right,
know, that's something that needs pretty good latency, doesn't have to be perfect, is constantly changing, and is a companion to something else going on. And I feel like that's kind of where certainly Microsoft and Apple kind of hinted that's where they're thinking first.
mhm,
With Microsoft Recall, which
right,
Microsoft had to backpedal on pretty quickly. And then Apple announced an almost identical feature, but more privacy
right,
because we're Apple.
right. And
Um,
funny on the recall thing, I so want that. Like privacy aside, like the ability. How often do you sit down and go, man, I know yesterday I was looking at this thing and I can't remember on I want it for web things because all of a sudden, like
well, and it's going to be in Chrome too. It sounds like so.
yeah, which is awesome. I okay, I get the privacy concerns, right? But man, the feature to me sounds killer. So I'm pretty excited about the recall
Yeah,
light features.
but I guess kind of the question is going to be for me is what do yeah, and this is now so there's the users. The then question goes is okay, how are developers going to be using this? What
Right.
things can developers do to take advantage of the local?
And I guess the history, if you think about the history generally, I mean, I think you unleash the capability and then let the creative cloud of masses, right? The app developers go and take advantage of
Figure it
them
out.
and they
Yeah.
go and do some really cool stuff there and you can do interesting things there. I was going to mention I think this is interesting on the technology side how these work. So you have this small LLM that's embedded there. And so, for instance, built into the OS is the ability to summarize, right? Or they're built into that LLM. What they're doing is they're doing a fine tune. They have fine tuned that small LLM to be really good at summarization, or it could be really good. But they're using these things called LoRA adapters. And what this is a really cool tech to me. It basically, you have a bunch of
Hmm.
fine tunes. It dynamically, at inference time, you're like, oh, I want to choose this fine tune, right? So I can create a bunch of fine tunes of the LLM and then decide what is the best one to use. And I just read today, because I was just reading up on this, Google is opening this up and allowing Android developers to create their own fine tune, their own LoRa adapter, and put it in their app and then use the embedded LLM. And that to me is going to be really game changing because small LLMs, they're restricted in their capabilities. But there's a lot of, if you need X capability, you can fine tune a small LLM to be really good at that. Now, it might not be good at much else when you do that, but that's okay if you use these LoRa adapters. You're like,
Yeah,
oh, here's the fine tune for this task. Go use this. And I know for sure Google is doing this with their, it's the AI core library. I assume Apple will do it and Microsoft and Mac OS will enable this. But that adds a whole nother level of kind of capabilities
that's
for
really
developers.
interesting. You're right. It does, and as we've kind of discussed in the past, that means that we've kind of got this small but relatively larger um, core system, and then
Right.
the our additional fine tuning just kind of sits on that, and that's relatively small, relatively lightweight. It's easy to run locally, but you're generating it someplace else. But you're only generating that once. You as the developer, you're
Right.
developing that in the cloud somewhere on the bigger system, and then you can deploy it pretty thinly. I mean, right now Google is using that for fine tuning of Gemini in AI Studio, and it's low weight enough that they can
Mm-hmm.
offer it for no additional cost over using plain Gemini.
Right, which is pretty amazing. Yeah, they're definitely using that with Google is innovating there and like with Gemini in like being you can fine tune and inference costs
Yeah,
for fine tuning. This is the cloud inference costs are the same. Most people are adding so like OpenAI lets you fine tune GPT 3.5, but you there's it X Mistral just rolled this out. I believe Microsoft's doing some. Everybody's doing this, but it is very aggressive for Google to do this for
right.
the same cost. But of course, locally, it doesn't matter, right? I build an app, I do some fine tune and we'll just say we'll stick with Gemini Nano, right? And now with my app comes that fine tuning file, and
So
now I use
that's
that,
really
and now I
so
have those
it's
capabilities.
very exciting. So we know that's going to be an AI core, which is on Android, and that means that developers are going to have access to the Gemini Nano model that's going to be in Gemini, in Android. Um, do we know what's coming up with any of the other operating systems? Like, I know that at Apple's Worldwide Developer Conference, they were talking about developers having some access, but I haven't found anyone that's seen that presentation yet or can talk about it. What have you heard?
Good question.
Okay,
I'm gonna throw out a guess. Apple tends to be conservative. So I would guess if there's going to be a laggard because they like to they don't like things to break in their platform. They have a quite different than Google actually, who kind of throws a bunch of things out. And, no, it's a different philosophy, and they're both valid. But Google will throw a bunch of stuff out and be like, might work, might not. Apple likes perfection, and they're just two different philosophies. And I can kind of appreciate both. My guess is Apple will lag a little bit in allowing that. I mean, they have all the pieces in place, and they actually document. The interesting thing is Apple has been really open about how it works. If you go and look at the Apple documentation about how this is going to work and the LoRa adapters and things like that, they have far from what I've seen, they have far more documentation about how it works than than Google does, and I'm a little less familiar with what Microsoft's doing. My guess is Microsoft, but Windows tends to be fairly open around access to APIs and things like that. My
yes,
guess,
yes.
and Microsoft is all in on AI. So my guess is you're a Windows developer, you're going to have this fairly soon on Windows. So Android and Windows probably first, and iOS later. But who knows? Apple is also the ones who document it better than anyone right now. What's going on? So what you just
One of the
said.
things that I find most remarkable is that Google put it into Chrome. You know, starting with we're
Oh
seeing it
yeah,
starting with the previews in Chrome 127 and 128, and production is currently Chrome 126. So within the next few months, we're going to have Nano built into Chrome. So that's a tremendous amount of web users that will suddenly have that, and I'm excited about that. I've seen the API. The API is public now. LangChain has a module for Chrome right now, which is amazing. Um, but it kind of raises two questions for me. So the first question it raises for me is, this is great. What about other browsers? Okay, so maybe Firefox is going to say they're now using it from, I don't know, Claude, whatever, whoever. Or maybe they'll sign a deal with OpenAI. And, Safari is going to have its own. So what does it mean when you've got multiple different models in your browser underneath everything? And as developers, how in the world are we going to deal with that?
Back to the 90s, baby. Like IE6
Right.
versus Netscape, right? Like it reminds me, remember? IE had all the proprietary
Yep.
like ActiveX controls and that and things like that. And so you had to build multiple versions. You really had to care a lot about versioning, right? Like you had to create, like you had to test 6 different browsers. So I don't know. And here I was thinking about that. I'm like, okay, so pretty much everything but Firefox is
Yes.
Chromium based. So they could put it in a base Chromium, but is an Apple or Microsoft that now
Right.
there's 2 competing LLMs. There's the Chromium based LLM running on Windows and running on Apple devices, and then there's their own LLM that's embedded locally. I don't know. I mean, is that okay? Is that a problem? But you're right. We could get in this. I love the idea of like in the browser. I think it opens up a bunch of really interesting things. And however, you're right. The challenge is okay, but I'm not running the latest version of Chrome. I'm a web developer, and now it works in the latest version of Chrome. But anybody on
Right.
Safari and Edge are probably the other two that you need to, quite frankly, worry much about. God bless. I love Mozilla Firefox, but I really don't think they're much of the browser
Yeah,
market.
there's
And I know there's things like Arc and Brave and things like that. But let's, if we're just honest with ourselves, there's a small number of browsers that count that are really important to support,
right.
and the rest
So
at
I
this
guess the
point
question
are
is going
kind
to
of on
be,
the edge.
how well, as a developer, how will I be able to detect which model is running? How do I adapt to it? Maybe in the future, and maybe this is a big pipe dream of my part, how do I specify which model to use? Can I download models off the web just like I can download fonts? Are we going to have a web AI?
Oh,
I don't know.
a W3C
Right.
LLM
I,
like kind of standard, right? That
it doesn't
doesn't
seem
seem
that far fetched, no.
out of
But
the realm of.
right. I mean,
No,
but
it
you got to
seems
think
like they
there are
should be
actually two
working on
elements
it
to that.
actually.
One is that you want a standard way to call the model, and the other is you want a standard for downloading a
Right.
model. I don't know.
I mean W3C or build it into, so if I was building, React or one of the big frameworks and things like that, I could
Okay.
build this all in like a. I mean, the reason those things took off originally was they were
Right.
abstraction layers against all the browser craziness, right? And now they're just making it much easier to do web
Yep.
development, right? They just take away a lot of code. But they could help mask, even if there's initially differences and things there. They could, whether Angular
You're going to see
or
those
or
compatibility
React
layers.
or any of the
Yes.
other. There's several other frameworks. Yeah, and so what's beautiful about them is they abstract away all of it, and even today they abstract away the relatively minor
And that
differences.
kind of, to me,
So
goes
maybe
to the
they'll be part of
second
the
part of the
solution.
question is, okay, what do we do for the browsers or the platforms that are not capable of doing it? How do we make sure that we've got easy fallback to the cloud?
So it was interesting, and I'm going to go by
Okay.
Apple because once again they documented it so well. So they basically have a
Yeah.
3-tiered. So what do they call it? Apple Intelligence 3-tiered system. You got local, you have an Apple servers in Apple Cloud, and then you have OpenAI, right? And they have this 3-tiered system of where they need to go and send the request there. And I do think there's
Yes.
one privacy, but there's also cost considerations there, right? Every time you take another hop, there's an additional cost there. So I do wonder if one way, I mean, you could say, hey, if it's locally, it's there, we'll use it local, and maybe you get a little better performance. Or we have to go to the cloud for this, you haven't updated, you have to go to the cloud and get this. and maybe you get a little more latency, right? Or it's a little less private and things there, right? Which of course those big will then use to market and say buy the latest device and get the latest and greatest. But there is this idea. I was just reading, and I'm forgetting the name. There's an open source framework that uses this really light LLM to basically route.
Uh huh.
What their demo is, you're talking to OpenAI and you're talking to Mistral 7B, I think, and basically they have this light LM, and it takes the thing and it's like, oh, this is easy. We'll send it to Mistral. Oh, this is hard. We're going to send it to OpenAI, and they're claiming like an 80% cost reduction versus OpenAI in inference costs, because a lot of things, a lot of the requests, a smaller
Yeah.
LLM can do. So maybe that whole kind of routing technology could also say, oh, do you have it locally?
And
If they're
actually,
good, do
that
it.
might be a
Otherwise, we'll go to the
fantastic
cloud.
application for a local in browser or in operating system LLM is just, classification. Even if you're saying almost all of my stuff needs to go remote, but I want to take advantage of the best remote place to do
Right.
it, I can do that initial one really
Totally.
quickly locally and then send it to the right cloud provider. Because I don't need to send it out to a cloud provider, have it
Absolutely.
process it, and then process it again. I can do some of that work locally. That's an excellent point.
Yeah. So it feels like there's a solution here that needs some work. But architecturally, I think what we're both saying is we can envision a system that worked pretty well doing this. Albeit there's definitely some work to be done to get there, and some cooperate. This browser stuff, this cooperation. When we think about the browser, I can't. One thing that's been striking me, and I was reading some stat about how much the apps that you use every day, how many of them are browser based versus locally based, and either they're the vast majority either browser based or they're
Uh-huh.
like an electron app. So essentially, it is a browser app, right? That's running locally. I mean, as the more and more the browser, this is like music to the Chrome team's ears, but the more and more capable the browser gets, the less and less we care about what the local OS
That's
is.
what.
And I have a feeling,
Go ahead.
okay, big, like with AI, right? Because we're talking AI, it's been talked about as we're going to go to more of an appless future. We won't need so many different things because AI will just handle our request. And maybe you get a browser that has an LLM embedded or has this routing that we're talking about. More and more, your local
It's a Chromebook.
PC is just well, it's a Chromebook, right? I mean, I honestly sometimes wonder. And okay, I do some things with video editing and some things that are CPU and GPU intense, and obviously, um, I was going to say development, but even the cloud development environments are pretty good. Um, I look and go, even as a professional, I could probably get
Yeah.
80+% of my work done on a Chromebook, and so it'll be really interesting how this all
And
plays out. And
I
AI
you
adds
know it,
another
it
element
also
to
occurs
that,
to me, one of
right?
the things we
Another
haven't talked about is, okay, once you've got your AI local, what does that mean for autonomous agents that are now working on your behalf? What does it
um,
what can you do? One of the things that I think is going to be really interesting is, once you've got a local LLM, what does that mean for autonomous agentic systems? So you're going to be doing a lot of that processing locally, and
right.
then you'll have your local agents just kind of, wandering out and maybe querying something and collecting that and storing it locally, and then processing it all on your local vector database using your local embedding system. All of these things are now local, and that's interesting and exciting. Far more interesting to me. Far more interesting to me personally
Total.
than recall.
Although it's interesting, it's almost like a recall. I was just thinking about, like, you're stop. You get the work started, right? And then you go and leave your
Yeah.
computer, and then it keeps on. I mean, that's what that promise that I'm super excited about that. It's what I always. It's so many things that I want to do can be solved with agents, right?
for
And we've been
for,
talk
for to
agents have
be to
been
be
talked about for
honest,
a long
these
time,
sorts of
right?
technologies I've been talking about for decades now. I mean, I still remember some of the frameworks that were being proposed back in the, back 20 years ago, 25 years ago, where, you had these autonomous
Right.
systems and a standardized API, and here's the library that, I mean, somewhere around here, I still have training manuals on how to do this.
So the question is the AI good enough now where we're going to get a break? It's all been amazing idea, and we just don't have the tech to implement it. And the question is, and it feels like we're getting closer, where the technology is good enough to fulfill that dream. Because you're absolutely right. Like there's
Oh,
videos
yeah.
from like the Xerox Park days, practically, of this stuff of like where you're like, oh, that would be so cool to have that now, right? And that's like 30 years ago, and things. So people, the thought was there, the technology hadn't caught up, and
What I,
so are we in the
I,
cusp
I
of
think we're
that?
almost there. So it sounds like we are having serious technical problems. So we're going to wrap it up here. Roger, thank you so much for coming on and doing this and suffering through the technical problems. We'll post some links to some papers, some interesting stuff going on, and I am sure we will have you on again, and we will talk about this so much more on Two Voice Devs.
Two voice devs. The technical gremlins come and get you sometimes, and sometimes you just got to admit defeat.